Hello and welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice, and hopefully as well shine some lights on some titles you can bring into your libraries, your classrooms and onto your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. In today's episode, I am joined by a wonderful creative duo, Chie Kutsuwada and Julian Sedgwick. Chie is a UK-based Japanese manga creator and illustrator. Chie graduated from the Royal College of Art in London and since then has carved out a successful career in illustration. More on that later. Chie creates her own illustrated stories and comic strips, as well as working on titles like the manga version of Shakespeare's As You Like It, which you may well have in your libraries. Chie regularly runs manga workshops for schools and art institutions, and recently has been known for her collaborations with author Julian Sedgwick. Now, Julian is the author of numerous books for young people, with a lifelong interest in the cultures of East Asia. On the way to realising his childhood ambition to be a writer, Julian studied Chinese studies and philosophy at Cambridge. We'll hear a little bit more about Julian's career journey a little bit later. But his first book was the Mysterium trilogy, published in 2013, which won the Rotherham Children's Book Award. Now, Chie and Julian, they began collaborating with combined manga and prose books a few years ago, starting with the Carnegie shortlisted Tsunami Girl in 2021, published by Guppy Books. And their latest creation is 100 Tales from the Tokyo Ghost Cafe, published 2023, and an absolutely brilliant book. You will hear from this episode that I love both of those books, Tsunami Girl and 100 Tales from the Tokyo Ghost Cafe. Brilliant writing, excellent manga, and the way that they work together as well, structurally, to build the narrative is just so clever. Another excellent title from Guppy Books as well. I've really enjoyed the comics books they've been bringing out recently. They're really a good publisher to keep an eye on. Anyway, that's enough from me. This is a really fantastic conversation. I always love hearing the different answers from a creative duo and the way they approach things in different ways, but to create one singular outcome. Lovely to talk to them. Here's what Chie and Julian had to say. Hello, Julian and Chie. Welcome to Comic Boom.
Thank you for having us.
You are very welcome. I'm really excited to have you both here. Firstly, because I absolutely love your books, and also because I know you're going to have lots of really interesting things to share with Comic Boom listeners. So to start us off, could you tell us a little bit, we'll go to Julian first, can you tell me a little bit about your journey as a comics reader? Are you a comics reader? Is that something that you've done for a long time? Tell us a little bit about your journey with comics.
Yes, definitely a comics reader to start with. So probably at school I was reading more comics than prose, and even through to A-levels, don't tell my then English teachers, I guess. So I started off reading comics really young and not great quality. I have to admit, things like Boy of the Rovers and some terrible war comics. But then I graduated to 2000 AD, right from the start of 2000 AD. So I grew up with that kind of, British comics tradition, but also that way of using comics to talk about the present day, even when you're talking about the near future, and that mix of humour and kind of political comment, all wrapped up in a science fiction package. So, yeah, that was my trajectory through comics for a long time, because when I was growing up, we didn't have really manga or, anime in translation here when I was first interested in Japan.
So your interest in Japan isn't necessarily linked to comics at all. That was something that kind of developed separately. I think we'll probably dig into that a little bit later, but yeah, tell us. Yeah,
no, just in brief, my route to Japan, to Japanese culture, was very sort of classical through philosophy and art when I was quite young. But at that point, there wasn't a popular culture that you could easily get hold of here. So yeah, all my comics reading was very much Western British comics tradition.
Interesting. And in contrast, Chie, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of comics were available to you as a child and how your journey to becoming an illustrator came about?
Yes. Well, I'm originally from Japan. And then if you were born in Japan, reading manga comic is, you cannot avoid.
Yeah.
And then, so as soon as I start reading, I mean, my family, I was really hugely encouraged to read anything. But actually, they are not really encouraging to read manga. And we don't do manga in schools in Japan. So I was like, when I was young, I actually visited my friend's house and read all the manga they've got. And then not talking much, but just reading on the corner of the room or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how I start reading. But manga is actually everywhere in Japan. So if you want to read, you can go, I don't know, friend's house or bookstore or anywhere.
And I'm really interested that it's not part. I had imagined it was going to comics manga was going to be really integrated into school life in Japan, but that's not the case.
Well, I'm not sure about it right now, but I think it still is. It's usually you cannot bring your manga to school. It's banned.
Oh,
usually, and then usually in library you don't have a manga. So it's not like we manga is nothing to do with school. It's more like something to do after the school, especially when you're young.
So it's more in that popular culture.
Exactly. It's like you cannot listen to your music during the class or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. That is completely not what I expected you to say. So that's sorted out some assumptions that I had there very neatly. I'm interested, as well, Chie was saying, around sharing comics. And that does seem to be something that certainly I've observed a lot happening, talking to people through the podcast. A lot of what they share is that kind of community aspect. And Julian, did you share comics with friends as you were growing up? This idea of the comic being passed around, I find quite interesting.
Yeah, I think particularly my brother Marcus, who, as you know, was a writer as well. We grew up in a very rural location, and we didn't actually have friends immediately to hand. And my memory is that we shared very intensely that comic world. So we both got our own issues of 2000 AD every week, but then we talked about it with each other. But particularly with 2000 AD, there was a kind of wider community, and I think it reached out to the kind of kids who were trying to find a place or trying to find felt a bit like outsiders. And of course, we see that a little bit with manga in English schools. It's often the manga kids get together, trying to find their place together. So my memory was of, really immersing in these worlds along with my brother, but then reaching out through the letters page, because of course there was no social media in 2000 AD to communicate with other strange kids across the country. So there was a sharing, definitely a community, but quite dispersed in my experience.
That's really interesting. And thinking about your reading diet now, Julian, what sort of things are you interested in? Do you still read comics as part of your reading diet? Is that something that you've lost along the way?
I read, at the moment, I'm reading several books in Japanese very, very slowly because there's about 4,000 kanji you need to learn. So I spent a lot of my time going slowly through books I brought back from Japan recently, and some of those are quite serious books about the tsunami and recovery. But I am also reading a manga series at the moment, very slowly, as I say, in Japanese, and that's for sort of light relief, which is called Midnight Diner Shinya Shokudo, which became a Netflix TV series, and is very good for slang.
And Chie, what about you? What sort of things are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading at the moment manga and novels and few ghost stories at the same time. As for manga, I'm reading manga called Delicious in Dungeon. Japanese title is Dungeon
That's also
Meshi.
on Netflix,
Netflix.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's
I watched
an
that.
anime
That's
series.
cool.
Yeah, it is. I really enjoy that series, and then it's kind of funny and deep and scary, interesting, everything in it. And also you can learn cooking. So that's great. And then I'm also reading some science fictions and some ghost stories as well. They are not manga. And then I also read every single manga I can see. For example, when I'm doing Twitter, X.
Yeah, oh no, I'm still with Twitter. I can't get on board.
In Japanese Twitter world, there are a lot of people actually uploading their manga and their 4-panel mangas, everything. So I did almost everything whenever I found one.
Brilliant. And I've heard other guests. We had an expert manga librarian come on the show once who was explaining that actually that we get quite a limited amount in translation in the UK. So we're maybe not getting as broad a picture of the kind of things that are available in Japan. Is that your experience too?
Yeah, I think it's especially English translated ones are very, very limited. And then I always impressed by the French people. They translate almost everything, like manga. So I found very unique, very niche manga translated in French, but not in English. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. Okay. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about your stories as kind of creative individuals, and then come together and talk about your collaborative works that you've done. So Chie, can you tell me a little bit about how you came from sort of reading manga in the corner of your friend's bedroom? How did you come to be a successful manga illustrator in your own right?
Well, I had a very, very wrong way to be here. Well, again, if you born in Japan and if you like any kind of drawing, at least once you tried manga style and at least you try to create manga story when you are young. And then I was one of them, but it was actually too hard to finish even one story. So I gave up, and then I gave up for very, very, very long time. But when I was about to graduate my MA here, I was a fine art student here in London, actually. And then my other Japanese friend were talking about that there was a kind of convention in London called MCM Expo. It was a long time ago. But the MCM Expo was not as big as at the moment, but it was still quite big thing. And we found out it was there. And so we decided to visit there. But because as an art student, we kind of thought maybe just not visit it, but how about having a table and selling our work there? So we forced each other to create at least one short manga comics. And then we did it, we print it at home, and then we start selling. And then we said short comic, but actually I ended up making 100 pages long.
Oh my goodness.
Manga story. So I just first, which is not recommended for all the young people who want to become manga or comic artist, actually. My recommendation is finish one short story first. But mine actually ended up in 100 pages long. So my first volume 1 was 24 pages or something. So I kept on making it until it reached almost done. And then at that point, some powerful people in manga comic world asked me if I want work as a manga artist.
Amazing.
And then I said yes. So that's how I started in professional way.
And so have you been based in the UK throughout your career?
Exactly. I didn't finish even one story when I was in Japan.
Very, very interesting. And Julian, how about you? I think it's always really useful. The reason why I always ask people to talk a little bit about their careers on the podcast and their kind of career journey is because I just think there's so many ways that becoming a writer and illustrator can happen that it's just really useful for teachers to have these stories in their kind of toolkit to talk to children and young people and share the many different ways people can come to have these roles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my story is quite similar to Chie's with some differences. So I had decided when I was 7 years old, I wanted to be a writer. And I can date it precisely because my mum has a diary entry of pompous little Julian saying, I'm going to be a writer. And I didn't get published until I was 47. So
wow.
The question I always ask in school talks is, why do you think it took me 40 years if I was so sure? And there's lots and lots of reasons, and some of them are to do with school trauma, and I struggled a lot with anxiety from that. And the upshot of that was I was just too afraid to show people what I was doing a lot of the time. So I'd be writing things or trying to write things and then never showing them to anyone, let alone a publisher. And that turns out to be quite a bad way to get published. So, so I sort of went through university. I was following my interest in East Asia, particularly Japan, in a kind of way. And I started working in film as a researcher, doing script development and even prop research and stuff for films, often with Chinese or Japanese kind of slant to it. And from there, I started to help write scripts. And at that point, I started working with my brother Marcus on a graphic novel that he asked me to help him with because it's very much like script format. So he wanted to use my experience, such as it was. And from there, I got an agent and I showed her the very serious adult literary novel I was working on, which I'm still working on. And she said, why don't you try writing for younger people? And I think this is the big bit of advice I always want to give is don't be absolutely blinkered about what form or what genre young people think they might want to write, because, you know, it might be you're great at picture books and you thought you were going to write the Great British Novel or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I've always been probably thinking about or writing every day, but it took until 47 to get something published, and now I'm just trying to catch up.
That is an incredible story. And then how did you two come together to form this partnership? I don't know who wants to answer that. I don't know if the answer would be the same for each of you.
I think maybe I'll start if that's all right, Chie, because I'd had this idea for ages. I wanted to write about the 2011 Great East Japan Triple Disaster, and, you know, maybe we'll talk about that more in a moment. But I'd gone to Japan. I'd spent quite a lot of time there, a lot of money, met a lot of people. Everyone was very keen on this book I was going to do. And right from the start, I knew I wanted it to be prose and manga, and that I wanted manga to tell some of the story for very specific technical reasons. And after being knocked back by quite a few publishers, I found a brilliant new publisher called Guppy, and our wonderful editor, Bella Pearson, said, that's great, let's go for it. We need to find a manga artist now. And a mutual friend of Chie's and mine gave me her email, and I emailed her.
And Chie, what was that? What was your reaction to receiving this email? If you care to divulge, tell us.
Yeah, it was a bit like mixed. I had a mixed feeling because I was happy because our mutual friend recommended me. So, but also I was a bit worrying about the theme. It is because I had a kind of personal experiments for the earthquake, and then I was a bit worrying about why this strange English guy wants to talk about our problem. Then so he sounded nice in his email, so I was not that, worried, but I was a bit, always worried if someone wanted to deal with our culture. So
yeah, exactly.
that was my first reaction. But, while we are exchanging emails, and I, started trust him, and then he explained everything what he experienced and then quite importantly what his friends in the affected area trust him and support him. So that makes me, to believe him, trust him.
Yeah, have that credibility. And so at that point, Julian, did you have quite a fully formed idea then of where? So this is the book that was to become Tsunami Girl, and first of all, it'd be good if as within your answer, if you could give a little bit of description of that book to anyone who might not have read it, but also, was this a fully formed idea that you had, or is it something that was being still in development, I guess?
By the time I contacted Chie, all the prose was written, and I'd sketched most of the manga as a kind of film script. And I'd had it was one of those nice times when the idea for a book comes almost fully formed, not the tiny details, not the exact characters, but what the mechanism is. I'd had friends living very close to the disaster when the radiation disaster happened at Fukushima, and been talking to them almost every day for several years before they actually left Fukushima and came back to the UK. And so when I went there, I went to basically, as Chie said, see what people felt about it. And people were very supportive. So by the time I was contacting Chie, I had this fully formed book about a young central character who's only a quarter Japanese, because that was important to me, that I didn't try and write like a fully immersed Japanese born and bred character. So Yuki is a quarter Japanese growing up in England, struggling with school. She's got one beloved Japanese grandparent, and she travels to Japan just before the disaster happens. And that was always going to be the shape. And the idea of the manga part was that it would talk about when her imagination, or when the other world, Anoyo, starts to happen. So when we veer into stuff that is ghostly, or between this world and the next, I really wanted to just show that on the page. And that's why I needed a great manga artist like Chie.
Brilliant. And so the same kind of way of working with the sequel, but with 100 Tales from Tokyo Ghost Cafe, or was Chie, were you involved earlier on in that process, that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Tsunami Girl is, Julian's story. And then I was just there to help him to make it, work. But for the second one, Julian kindly offered me to get more involved in, creating stories, and then designing characters, and then even writing some part of the script as well.
And it was a lot of fun. So for in this book, the manga is the through story. So it's the opposite way around to Tsunami Girl, and the prose stories spin off from the spine story. And we basically just kind of acted it out together. And as soon as we knew, because I'd made these journeys up the coastline collecting ghost stories, and it just seemed, okay, let's have a mechanism where we go on a journey and things happen to us. But of course, playing versions of ourselves, so we can just have fun and imagine those encounters.
Yeah, I loved it. I read on my own first, just as soon as it came out. I was really excited about it. Got it, read it.
Thank you.
And then early on this year, my daughter had pneumonia. She's 14, and she was in hospital for 4 days. And so I was staying in hospital in a little camp bed next to her. And basically, I read the whole thing out loud to her while she was in hospital.
Oh wow! Fantastic.
So I have like a real emotional connection to it as well. I should just read to her without her having to have pneumonia and being in hospital. But I feel like once you're a teenager, that reading to your child, you don't tend to do it as often. And it was a really kind of special thing.
It's really nice to hear that, because, to be honest, both these books, although particularly Ghost Cafe has a lot of fun and a lot of spooky stuff in it, it's also about how do we deal with difficult times. That's what all these stories are about. Obviously, maybe overcoming a tsunami, or just loss, or being ill, or, having to change what you're doing in life. So it's lovely to hear it being shared like that, and I hope it helped.
Yeah, it definitely did. It's a world you can be immersed in, I think. Definitely. We found ourselves immersed in it. And we were just watching Race Across the World, which it started off in Japan. And there was a part of it where some of the mythology was referred to, and straight away we're like, we know about this. Really? So then the connection came all back again,
Wow.
It was great. Chie, are you working in isolation, or do you actually come together to do your writing?
Julian actually kindly invited me to his house for maybe 3 times or something like that, so we can kind of spend whole day using sticky parts, write down all the little things, the episode and then dialogue we want to use, or characters, and we kind of create huge A1 size paper with timelines and then things like that. So from time to time, I was in, I'm based in Brighton, so I was in Brighton, or sometimes even I was in Japan. But from time to time, we met face to face, discuss and then created that big like story.
Yeah,
together.
and it's interesting because even in this age of being able to do Zoom screen share or whatever, this has quite a complicated structure for this book, and we wanted it to be seamless. So we really needed a big table to literally spread loads of bits of paper out, like Chie said, and even act things and feel what each other one is really feeling about the other person's suggestions. And the weird thing is, I mean, maybe it's a bit personal, but I'll share it anyway, that we were working together the weekend just before my brother died, and I knew he wasn't doing very well. So the whole process of this book, for both of us, has been quite an intense one, and that sense of being a team and being together has been really important, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've talked to a lot of kind of creative duos in the course of making the podcast, and when people say they just type into a Google sheet, I always feel like, oh, really? It's like I'm imagining what you're describing. This big kind of, yeah.
I think it's important to be in the room sometimes. Sometimes it's when you make a suggestion and you can just feel the other person isn't that happy with your suggestion, and I don't think you get that quite the same certainly across just a document, you know.
Yeah. I think it was really, really great balance between face-to-face time and working on your own time. So we have like both in nicely balanced both of the time. So that works really well for me. I needed time to think about on my own, to deep into the imagination and then sketching. But I also need to see his face, how he reacts, and then, that kind of thing. So it's really great.
Yeah, it's obviously been very successful. And you mentioned that you both appear as kind of characters in 100 Tales. So what was that like as an experience? Chie, you decided to capture yourself in rabbit form. What was the thinking behind that? How did you come to embody yourself in that character?
Okay, and first of all, I personally preferred not showing me directly inside of my creation. That's one reason. And then another one is I'm so get used to draw myself as a rabbit, because it started when I and my friends just had a chatting on some SNS somewhere, and we kind of decided to the design character which represent us. And then I picked up rabbit because at that time I was playing one game which was a horror game, and then there is a rabbit suit character.
Terrifying.
Which has a really cute rabbit suit, but actually it's a killer, and it has a blood on everywhere. So I really like that cuteness and scary things together. So since then, rabbit is my persona, and then I use that rabbit character, rabbit me, for the series I was doing for Japanese newspaper, which was about kind of illustrated column about what I found interesting and funny in living in the UK kind of thing. So I'm kind of, that rabbit is part of me. So it's quite natural.
It had to be. It was the only way to represent yourself. So Julian, what was it like for you to be encapsulated in manga form?
Yes, I worried about it for a moment because I thought, is this like an ego trip? But, the Julian in the book, he's quite hapless and a bit dim. He's got a good heart. When my wife finished reading it, I said, so what did you think? He's like a dimmer, more hapless version of me, right? And she said, So I think it's probably pretty accurate. Although Chie very kindly made me look a little bit younger than I do. So. But it felt, this book in particular, and using this device just felt so natural right from the start. And it just seemed like the right thing to do. So here's me as a kind of informed outsider. And there's Chie as a terrifying killer inside a rabbit suit. It's informed insider. And it just, okay, we can have both views now on these stories and the culture. And we can travel together, and Chie can teach me as we go. And sometimes she might get things wrong. Sometimes I get things wrong. Yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do. And it means I've got to keep that green quiff that's on the cover now, because so that school kids can recognise me.
Yeah, otherwise there'd be mass confusion.
Yeah.
You mentioned it a little bit earlier in terms of being quite aware of you being someone who's not Japanese but very much fascinated and very informed about the culture. And so was that something that you were really considering as you were writing?
Yeah, really a lot, and I thought about it a lot. I mean, yes, I'm not Japanese. After my own father died, I had a kind of second substitute father, very intense, 10 years friendship with an older Japanese guy who became very much like my father, and grandfather to my two boys who was small then. And we got to travel a lot in Japan and do incredible things. We were really lucky. And when he had died just not long before the tsunami happened. So for me, it was a subject I had to come back to. And as I said, I thought, well, the only way to do this is to have a central character who is partly an outsider. And that seemed to me, if I did it carefully and did lots of interviewing and lots of, sort of reflecting about it, I hoped it would work. And then for the new book, I thought, well, maybe I just will be 57-year-old me with a green quiff, and then that's going to be legitimate. But as I say, I think having the outsider and the insider view together is a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, I think that was really successful. And Chie, I know you said that you were hesitant at first when you first got Julian's email, but how's that perception changed as you've gone along the process of making two books together now?
Yeah, well, first of all, if the point is if I can trust that person, and then obviously I think I trust him now, and then he has he's got extremely, how do you call it, delicate balance. He understands the balance, how real Japanese feel in that kind of occasion, that kind of things. Yeah. And he even when he's not really there, Julian is always try to understand. He's not so that's why I can trust me. Okay. So it sounds a bit, I sounds a bit too much, but I really need that to work with story like this. And then I also just simply really impressed by the story. So that is the two most important things. I can trust him as a person, and then I can trust him as a writer. So
win-win.
That's very nice of you to say that, Chie.
Oh.
The thing also, I think, is, people write from lots of different motivations, don't they? I hear writers talk about why they're writing what they're writing. But I think the most fundamental thing is if you're writing from the heart and with good intention, and if you can do that, it's a big start to hopefully treating these things sensitively. And then we have a sensitivity reader on Tsunami Girl. I had a really brilliant young female academic Japanese sensitivity reader who had worked as a listening volunteer in the recovery communities, and again, I can trust her feedback. So it's as Chie says, it's all about trust in every direction, I think.
Yeah, and when you're writing, are you just focusing on the story and wanting to make the best story that you can? Are you thinking about the reader and kind of having a profile of who's going to read this and what's the impact going to be on them, or is that almost too much? I think
that's too much. It's terrifying. If I used to do this thing in a workshop where I'd say, how far do you read until you decide whether you're going to give up on a book or not? And kids would put their hand up and say 3 chapters. And I'd say anyone shorter than that. And people would say 1 chapter. And I'd say anyone shorter than that. And someone would say the first page. And I'd say anyone shorter than that. And there's always someone to say the first sentence. And you think, you can't have in mind, I've got to impress someone. So ultimately, I think you're writing towards the story and some version of yourself when you're younger, probably, is my really honest answer.
Yeah. Chie, what about you?
I'm actually a bit different. I always thinking about readers, and I also, sometimes I do create my own stories as well, and I do all the character designs and everything. Whenever I'm doing it, I kind of thinking there is at least one person in the world who is fall in love with my character. So I'm kind of thinking that way. And then also I'm kind of thinking the readers they don't know me. So what I should express my thought is I have to be careful because they don't know me. So they are not they're not in favor to me. So I was just kind of thinking that things as well. And then also I sometimes want to exchange my feeling to someone like me out there. There are people like me. So that's kind of thing I'm always kind of actually thinking. But at the same time, I also just having fun creating without thinking, without worrying anybody. Apart from me, so maybe just to please myself.
Yeah. I think so. One of the things that I was interested in, I was once in a heated debate so I was on a panel selecting books for something linked to a literary festival. So we were talking about, and I was like, "This is the best book out of all these ones we've read. This is brilliant." And there was a discussion because it was whether or not we would include it as a graphic title. Obviously, it's got a lot of prose in it, and so there's a heated debate going on, which is largely irrelevant, I guess. But it was about using book in education. One of the things that came up was that I think gateway drug to manga may have been used at one point in the phrase, but that basically was saying that it could be, it could introduce manga to a whole load of readers who haven't ever experienced manga before, and in the same way it could introduce prose writing to a whole load of readers who mainly read manga and don't tend to read more traditional prose. So I just wonder, what's your thoughts on that? Is that something that excites you about doing these books in combination?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. with Tsunami Girl, the manga was there for a technical reason because it was a Japanese theme, so I thought that would be appropriate, but also to show the line between this world and the other world. But I also always thought it could do this job of taking manga readers to prose and prose readers to manga. And when I'd done earlier, like my graphic novel with my brother, I'd meet people who said I'd never go near comics or manga because I don't know how to read it. And then people who said I don't read prose anymore. And I just thought if we got this right, it could do this kind of bridging function. And the lovely thing is, as I go around school events, I meet so many librarians who say it is doing that. So to the publishers who turned it down out of hand, I say,
have a bit more imagination.
Yes.
Take a few more risks.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. What do you think about that? Do you think there's potential there in the same way? Do you agree that this could be bringing manga to new audiences?
Yeah, I totally agree with Julian. I had a similar experience when I did manga Shakespeare. And then I was told that some parents and people, they told me that their children start actually reading, after reading manga version of Shakespeare, their kids start reading actual Shakespeare. So it's a kind of, that you just feed their interest in any ways. And then I think that our two books are great example. It feeds each other. And then it stimulates their imagination in different ways. And then I think manga only readers, they found it, how fun the reading is. And then just reading novel kind of readers, they found that like manga is also good. It's definitely happening. And I was told that things as well by a lot of parents and librarians after the books are out.
Fantastic. And what you're talking about, sort of meeting with teachers and pupils, librarians. I know, Chie, that you've done quite a lot of school visits. How does meeting your readership face to face, meeting the young people who might be reading your work, accessing your work, does that inform what you do?
Yeah, it was actually really fascinating. I met some new kind of kids because I used to meet a lot of manga fans I still meeting a lot of manga fans as well. But because after that Tsunami and 100 Tales from the Tokyo Ghost Cafe, I also started meeting a lot of young people who just simply love reading, maybe not only manga. And then maybe some of them just don't know much about manga. And I've never get any negative things from them. They're really kind of fascinated by everything. So I found it's really, I'm doing something quite important, bridging Japan to the other country and manga and novel and, do that kind of bridging things, which is exchanging two different cultures. And then, I'm really kind of excited and satisfied with what I've been doing with him.
Yes, massive impact in all sorts of ways. Julian, what's your learnings? I know you've also been a patron of reading for a school as well, so you've had that kind of long-standing relationship, and I'm just really interested in what you've learnt from working with schools and pupils.
Oh, so much. I mean, I was really reluctant to go and do school talks in the first place because of the kind of anxiety that I'd taken away from my own schooling, but it was made clear to me that it's a good thing to do. And I've come to love it. I mean, I think I'm getting towards 350 school visits now. And I come away from almost every one of them feeling lifted up by some encounter. So whether that's with a young reader or with a teacher or a librarian, I generally find it's energizing, and I love that direct contact with people and reading maybe a bit out loud or watching Chie drawing live and seeing the effect on people. So it's absolute honest answer that I've come to value it. And sometimes having these longer relationships with schools. So some schools I just visit annually or every 2 or 3 years, and developing that relationship with the library or an English department. And then, I was very lucky to be patron of reading for Leighton Park Quaker School in Reading, reading in Reading, and to develop even a bit of a relationship with people across 3 years, and maybe do different workshops around the same thing. So yeah, I just feel very glad to get to do that.
So we're coming to the end of the podcast. It's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on. I'd like to end the podcast with maybe a couple of takeaways or things to get teachers thinking, who might be listening, thinking about the sorts of things we've been discussing. I don't know if you've got together and had some thoughts on what you could do. Or...
I have a general thought, which might sound obvious, and I don't want it to sound patronising, but across the 10 years of doing school visits, and particularly of late, I've noticed just how much a little bit of preparation before an author or illustrator comes in makes a huge difference to the event and what you can take away from it. And I know school timetables are immensely complicated and there are so many demands on everyone. But just particularly in the last year, I've had some really dramatic cases of places I've revisited and seen them do that prep work. And just the response in the talk and afterwards in the workshops being so much more dramatic. So the takeaway I'd like to offer is, if you've got an author or illustrator coming in, is just to really value that event before it happens.
Yeah, that is such a good thing to highlight. So at my work at the National Literacy Trust, we arrange a lot of author visits. And yeah, that's something that we really work with schools to do, is to make sure that the children are primed and then they can get the most out of it when they've got this sort of small window of time with someone. Yeah. Chie, did you have anything that you wanted to?
Well, yeah, I've been thinking, so maybe the teachers who's listening to this podcast and not too afraid of manga, if their student just go crazy about it. Manga is not scary, and then it's not just for fun as well. It's the great thing about manga is it's just for entertaining, it's just for fun, as well as it's kind of more, especially young people, teenagers. The story is always kind of be with them, and they quite often involve the storyline of kind of growing up to be a kind of better you kind of things. So don't get afraid of it. And if you are too afraid, contact me. I will help you.
There's an offer of help there if anyone who is intimidated. I love that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. The final thing that we ask guests is if we were to add one comic or book about comics, you can't recommend your own one, so I won't say combination of prose and comic, to add to our to-be-read piles tomorrow, what book should we be picking up next, do you think?
I've got here a wonderful graphic memoir by Pedro Martin, which is called Mexikid. It came out last year. It's called Mexikid, a graphic memoir, and it's Pedro's own story about his large and interesting family growing up in America, even though he's Mexican, in the US, even though he's Mexican. So it's a very nice where do I fit, who am I, cross-cultural identity kind of book, but it's also very funny, and you'll learn a lot about Mexico and large dysfunctional families. It's beautifully drawn and beautifully written. I think it's a great example of what graphic novels can do.
I 100% agree with that. And Pedro has been on the podcast, so I'll also put a link to his episode in the show notes
I didn't
as
spot
well.
that, so there we go.
No, that's brilliant. It's great to have a shout out for his books. I love it. Chie, what would you recommend we read?
Well, sorry, I was not thinking about.
That's okay. There's normally a pause here while people look at their bookshelf. I'll be honest.
Okay, yeah, I was looking at my bookshelf
I can
actually
tell.
at the moment. Sorry, I'm. Well. I would recommend Lorena Alvarez. The creator of the name is Lorena Alvarez, and then title is Hicotier, a night light story, which is a kind of graphic novel I recently had. I think it's basically for young people, but it's just, story is quite just, how do you call that? Quite straightforward, but the art is so beautiful, and it stimulates your imagination. It might give you a slight beautiful nightmare. But it's beautifully done artwork, which I was so inspired.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
A real visual treat.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I've loved having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Really nice to talk about it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Chie and Julian for joining me on the podcast this week. I just love the way they approach combining prose and manga. It's really innovative. Each element makes its own kind of standout contribution, but also the combination is more than the sum of those excellent parts, and they really enrich each other. I just love the reading experience that I get from their work. So definitely recommended. My actual recommendation for this episode, though, is going to be a website rather than a book this week. comicdevices.com is a fantastic resource that explains and defines the kind of terms used in making and reading comics. If you wanted to get into some kind of discussions, if children and young people that you're working with want to be able to understand and use the terms of the techniques that are being used on the page a little more, it's a great resource. It's like an online illustrated dictionary for comic terms. So that's comicdevices.com. It's been put together by Raymina Yi, who herself is a comics creator, and it's just a highly recommended free resource. So check that out. It's beautifully designed as well, as you would expect from someone in the comics world. And speaking of free resources, I was lucky enough this week to attend the Carnegie Awards, the announcement for both writing and illustration medals for the Yoto Carnegies. The ceremony was last week, and it was wonderful to see illustration and writing celebrated in those really prestigious awards. The awards were given out in the theatre where they have the Matilda show, so it was a really amazing bookish backdrop. Absolutely loved it. And this podcast has something in common with the Carnegies, which is that we are both sponsored by ALCS. Yes, the Authors License and Collecting Society. And I just noticed as I was looking through on the Carnegies website itself, you can find lots of downloadable resources about the shortlists, both writing and illustration shortlists. So there's posters you can print off, there's reading tick lists, and then there's also some really nicely designed ALCS resources, one for children and one for young people. So that's kind of age differentiated illustrated there, explaining the difference between copyright and plagiarism. So I just think it's a nice place to go, a nice way to hook in, so talking about when it's okay to copy things and when it isn't, and what happens. That's always a difficult conversation to structure with children. So there's some nice resources. There's a poster, a teacher's guide, and those 2 age differentiated student booklets as well, produced by ALCS for the Carnegies, completely free and downloadable, along with all the other Carnegie resources on the website. So I will pop the link to that in the show notes if you're interested. That's it from me this week. As always, I'd love to hear from you. You can get hold of me on Twitter/X and at Lucy_Braidley, which is BRAIDLEY. You can get in touch and follow the podcast on Instagram on at comic_boom_podcast. And also now, if you listen to the show on the Comic Boom website, I know not many people do, most people listen through Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but if you do, you can go onto the episode show notes for the episode that you're listening to, and there is there now at the top a facility that allows you to text message the show. So you can do that and send a message in there too. I'd love to get some messages through that. Would love to be able to read them out at the end of episodes. So please do get in touch if you've got a moment to spare. I would love to. You can also, of course, leave a review or give a friend a personal recommendation about the podcast. We'd love to continue to grow the audience. It's a great community to be part of. So do give us a shout out whenever you get the opportunity. But that's it from me for this week. My name is Lucy Braidley. I'm the producer and host of Comic Boom, the Comics and Education podcast. Thanks for listening.